being conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with State of California executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Zoom is being utilized for this meeting. In case of issues, meetings will be uploaded to the city website as soon as possible after this meeting. We will be conducting today's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. Committee members and staff are participating from remote locations, practicing appropriate social distancing. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting by use of Zoom as noted on the city's website and as noted on the agenda. Members of the public wishing to speak to the Climate Action Committee may do so during public comment or may comment on agenda items during the discussion of each item and must be logged into Zoom. Anyone using abusive, vulgar, offensive, threatening, or harassing language, personal attacks of any kind, or offensive terms that target specific individuals or groups will be muted and removed from the meeting. Please do not abuse this new way to provide public comment.
Thank you, Kenna. I will proceed with roll. Jerry Glazer.
Sorry, trying to get around to the right screen. Yeah, I'm here.
Alex Goodman. I do not see Alex yet. Anyone know if he's planning on being here today? I have not heard from him. Dina Allen.
Here.
Joshua Somane.
Here, thank you.
Welcome back. Kenna Lee.
Here.
Lisa Pierce.
Here.
Deborah Burns.
Here.
Woody Hastings.
Here.
Argus Brent.
Here.
Ambrosia Thompson. I believe she is out of the office right now. Sunali Sikan.
She's not going to make it today.
All right. Everett Fernandez. Did not see Everett here. Sarah Gurney.
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Diana Rich noted she was not going to be able to make it today, and I do now see Alex Goodman has joined the meeting as well. So you do have a quorum.
Wonderful, thank you. We're going to speed past an inspiration today because we have such a heavy agenda. I will go straight to the review of action items from last meeting, and last meeting's action items were the council members were going to request to add appointees of city committees to the agenda emails. And I know I got one, so hopefully that went through without any problem.
And I can speak to that, Kenna,
Yeah,
after now or later, it doesn't matter.
I was to finish writing out the list of new duties, and you guys got that in your packet. We had the June 14th and June 18th events, both of which happened. And thank you to everyone who attended and got us out there at those. And then we were all to review the Climate Action Framework draft. So those were our action items, and hopefully we all did all of those things. So now's the time when we take comments from the public regarding items that are not on today's agenda. Does anyone present have comments about things that are not on the agenda? Evan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for taking my comments. It's really great to see some familiar faces here. So I used to live in Sebastopol. I lived in Sebastopol for almost a decade. And I'm still here in Sonoma County, and I just think it's so cool that this committee exists. I think addressing the climate emergency is so important, which is what brings me here today. So I'm here to talk about Sonoma County's single greatest contributor to climate change, which of course is transportation. So nationwide, according to the EPA, transportation accounts for 27% of emissions, but here in Sonoma County, at least according to the Regional Climate Protection Authority, it accounts for almost 60%. So I'm sure you guys are all familiar with that challenge we have. But I want to talk more specifically about commuting to jobs, where unfortunately unfortunately for workers and our planet is where folks spend way too much of their time. Between 2015 and 2018, miles traveled for workers within our county increased by 10%. During the pandemic, more affluent white-collar professionals shifted to working from home, and many of them are now doing so permanently. Lucky them. This, however, was not the case and is not the case for essential workers in professions like agriculture, food service, or child or elder care. So their commutes continue. But their story gets more complicated when we look at housing. Sebastopol has more than 5 low-wage jobs for every affordable home. And to cover the almost $2,000 average rent in a 2-bedroom unit in Sebastopol, residents need to earn just over $37 per hour, according to the Press Democrat. The median hourly wage for farm workers in Sonoma County, on the other hand, is just above 17. So similarly low wages are to be found in other essential professions, as you can imagine. The math is simple. Without subsidized, affordable housing in Sebastopol, the majority of these workers must increasingly commute from outside the city, adding to traffic and greenhouse gas emissions, not to mention the perpetuation of an unsustainable and unjust system of poverty, one that systematically excludes an entire segment of the population from this town. Add to this racial inequities that have left people of color with less means to compete in the housing market, and it's no wonder that Sebastopol, at least according to the U.S. Census, tops the list of least diverse cities in Sonoma County and among the least diverse in the Bay Area. So environmental justice means ensuring affordable housing, especially for essential workers, which brings me to my final point. In 2019, a proposal was brought before the city of Sebastopol called the Woodmark Apartments, which would have provided 84 units of desperately needed 100% affordable housing, half of which would have been reserved for our farm worker community. But instead of enthusiastically supporting this project, from what I've been told, though I still have yet to be able to reach the planning department to hear the whole story from that side, the city of Sebastopol has presented 3 years worth of delays and barriers, which now jeopardize the future of these homes. The financing initially awarded to this project to ensure its affordability will be terminated at the end of this year unless they can begin building. Every delay and obstruction by the city has only increased the likelihood that these homes will never be built and that working families and community members who so desperately need them will be left out. Opponents of this project will warn of everything from traffic to the removal of trees as a climate impact, but as members of the Sebastopol Climate Action Committee, I trust that you all bring a more holistic and nuanced perspective to the matter of climate action, recognizing the vastly greater environmental toll and environmental injustice of excluding a city's workforce from living there. And that even beyond vehicle emissions, when it comes to water and energy, the impact of smaller, more dense apartments pales in comparison to the environmental demands of larger single-family homes, including those being built right now in your community by more affluent transplants to Sebastopol. I'm almost done here. Preventing the Woodmark Apartments and projects like it will not alleviate the overall impact on our local resources. It simply shifts that impact around, perpetuating the problem and hurting those most vulnerable in the process. You all have been tasked with advising city leadership in its climate goals. So I commend you for that. It's a big task.
I'm sorry, you've gone past 3 minutes.
All right, so I'm here to ask you to hold the city accountable to provide a more holistic and nuanced perspective, and to demand that they not only remove the needless obstacles and delays that threaten this project, but to streamline and support the Woodmark project and projects like it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your comment, Evan. Sunny?
Yeah, I'm just also wanted to speak to that. Talked with Evan about it yesterday, and I'm very supportive of affordable housing being built in Sebastopol. And certainly as the parent of now 23-year-old and 18-year-old, seeing that my own kids can't afford to live here as they grow older is kind of heartbreaking. And then as a teacher, seeing declining enrollment in schools because families can't afford to live here. And I think this really is an issue that the Sebastopol that overlaps with the Climate Action Committee's interests in terms of climate and also equity. And I'm wondering if maybe either the equity group or the transportation working group might pick this up and talk about it and look into it, and then maybe bring it back to the whole committee, or just seeing if your committee's actually talked about this specific project, and then also was interested in trying to see, Carrie, if you could connect with Evan and give him sort of the background on what's the delay with the city.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming and commenting today. And this is something that I think we would be interested in talking about more. Today's agenda is very full with other items, so we will not be responding to your comments at this time. Is there any other public comment about things that are not on today's agenda?
Could I just ask Kenna, if would it be appropriate to email the people that are on the equity working group or the transportation working group to see if they might want to discuss it in their
Absolutely. Our working groups have a lead who has given an email that's posted on the city website for the Climate Action Committee. And they have put those emails there because they are interested in public comment.
Okay, and then maybe Evan, you could just share, if people want to support this, Evan put together a petition. You could link to that maybe in the chat, Evan.
Great, thank you. All right. So seeing no further hands for public comments, I am going to move on to the statements of conflict of interest. Does any voting member of the committee today have any conflict of interest to disclose? And seeing none, we'll move on to the planning department report for Carrie.
I think you can, and I can give just a quick update on Woodmark since it is a project we're working on actively and there's clearly interest here. And in fact, I was literally on the phone with the developer less than half an hour ago, trying to move that project through the process. Evan, I do have, so it is going through a ministerial process. The developer switched tax a little over a year ago. That is a pretty complex legally process, but I'm happy to talk to you about it. I'm also, if you send me an email, I do regularly send out updates to that interested folks on the process of that. But they have resubmitted under this the SB 35 regulations, and we're in the midst of reviewing that. We've almost completed the review for that. We're actually meeting with them tomorrow to hopefully wrap up some final details. Other news, the Habitat for Humanity project was approved by the Planning Commission. That is going to the City Council hopefully in early August for final approval. Then that is for affordable townhomes just down from what's in the vacant lot across from Safeway and by the Masonic Lodge, right by the school. The other big item to report is the budget. The council started budget discussions last night, and I will let Councilmember Gurney talk a little bit more of the perspective of how that went, since she is actually a member of the council. But that will be the CIP capital improvement plan is slated for the the June 19th. Is that right? Sorry, July 5th meeting. I'm getting my meetings mixed up a little bit here. The Planning Commission will have two hearings next Tuesday. One is an appeal from Lowell Sheldon against a denial of his alcohol permit, and the other is the capital improvement plan. So if you do want to see a little bit more focus on the capital improvement plan, the Planning Commission will be going through that in a little bit more detail. They do determine consistency with the general plan on that, and of course, many of our general plan guidelines are related to sustainability and walkability. So
Carrie, can
will
you
leave it at that?
Date
Yes.
of the Planning Commission meeting?
So the date of the Planning Commission meeting is next Tuesday, the 28th, and it starts at 6 p.m. just like the council meeting. Oh, and then there was one comment you had, Kenna, on the action items regarding the placing members on the mailing list for agendas. Our city clerk does not like to do that without the permission of folks. So if you do want you can either send her and Mary Corley or Holly Hansen an email, or you can send it to me and I will pass it on if you do want to be on that mailing list, and we'll make sure we get you on.
Just to reiterate what she's talking about for anyone that wasn't here, that is so that it's easier for us to keep an eye on the agendas of what's coming up, because we felt a little blindsided by some items that came up. And fortunately, Carrie had reached out to some of our working group members from the city council meeting saying like, hey, this is on the agenda. But you can sign up for the city to email you directly when agendas are finalized, so that it's easier to keep an eye on those. All right, Sarah, do you want to do the city council report?
Thank you. Yes, let me go back to the report from the action items from last time. I did contact Mary about that very item of the outpush for information about the city's agenda. Carrie backed me up. Diana was also involved. And Mary responded basically saying, please enroll yourself. So like Kenna just said, if you want to get the information, please go on the city website and look for that. The council did meet last night to talk about the budget. Thank you to the members of this committee who did speak. We had 8 people from the public speak on the budget. Kenna, Woody, and Steve were all from this group speaking in favor of the grant writer, along with 2 other members of the public. And the council had a challenging review because there are a number of items outstanding that make it difficult to talk about a real draft budget. We are still underway with labor negotiations with our 3 different employee groups. We also are looking at a review of our staffing for the city council that has been out for about 6 months, that isn't back yet or barely back from the consultant, which will affect our number of employees in our organizational chart. We also, as I mentioned, are waiting for Phoebe's climate action framework, because I think those action items could very well affect our budgeting this year. We mostly spent time discussing what the budgets committee, Vice Mayor Hinton and Councilmember Rich called the wish list. These are items 1 through 9. I'll just say very quickly: the outreach worker for the unhoused, a continuing relaunch, safe parking, Mayors and Council Members Association providing a clerk there, money to cover our CalPERS liability, the grant writing position, several requests from the police department for an additional officer, a technician, a dispatcher, administrative assistant, 4 more positions there, cooling centers, and remodel at City Hall, as well as a vehicle replacement plan for the fire department and the police department. All of those items received general enthusiasm. They are just penciled in. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars that are not worked in the budget, along with staffing changes and salary and benefit changes that will come through the labor negotiations. So the budget is right now currently on the status of this year's budget rolling into next year's budget is what's called a carryover. And the council will be meeting in July to discuss the updates through closed sessions and also through public meetings. And hopefully we will get to a real adopted budget sometime in July. We also did a few other things. The capital improvement plan was not discussed, and there's just a lot of work ahead between now and the end of July. I hope all of you will continue to tune in. I so appreciate your comments. It looks like Carrie wants to follow up to my remarks.
Thank you. Speaking of, meeting announcements, there is a town hall next Thursday from the Committee of Unhoused to update on homeless services. So that is potentially of interest to folks here as well.
And correct me if I'm wrong, either of you, Sarah or Carrie, but if any other members of the committee or members of the public wanted to reinforce the request for the grant writer, the July 5th City Council meeting would be another opportunity to do that for public comment.
Yes,
Great, thank you.
I believe
right.
so.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I know things get up in the air all the time. So we will move on to our regular, oh, Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I just am really aware of the time here. It's almost 4 o'clock and we've got so much to cover. And Steve Brown is with us. And I know he's a very busy guy and he's not on the agenda for a while. And I was wondering if it makes sense to possibly bump that item up first so he can get on with his other work.
That's a great idea. I was going to table item A because there's not urgency on that one as it is. So if Phoebe, if you're okay waiting until after the REACH code discussion, we will limit that discussion to about 25 minutes to make sure that we do have time for the climate action framework draft discussion. So is Jerry, are you leading the discussion on the reach code options, or is that Tor? Who's going to be leading that discussion for the energy working group?
Well, I can start off by just saying what I have done and what's been processed through, and then I think I'll hand it off to Carrie and Steve. 4 weeks ago, the committee asked me to reframe the recommendation from our group on what to do as far as reach code. And in fact, it goes a bit further than just a reach code. It talks about how do we record various things, since we had examined our municipal code and elements in it to see how they fit. And so we gave the full recommendation. You guys asked if we would reform it in the format from Alex's form, which, by the way, was a PDF. So I converted it to Word so I could actually edit in it. And I sent that off to Carrie, and she shared that with Steve so they could work on it. You know that the process in the form is for us committee members or task group members to rough out an idea that we want to bring forward and give staff a chance to look at it, say whether they say, yeah, that's a good idea, not a good idea, what we ought to think about it, what it might cost, what the complications would be. And then we bring it back to the committee for discussion so that we don't just get what we have as input, but staff gets to turn in and give us the handle on their expertise of what it will take for the city to do something and whether it's worthwhile for the city to do something. So that's what I did. I handed, Carrie had it and sent it to Steve, and they both, I believe, have comments to make. And by the way, the rest of you are supposed to have read it. Did everybody raise their hand who read it? Okay, so that was the whole point. See if the process is working. And from that point on, whatever is new is what Carrie and Steve have to say. By the way, I gave them a hard time because they didn't write in the document. And quite frankly, I was looking for the posting. The only reason I found out that we hadn't posted the meeting yet was that I went looking for the document so I could read the sections that Alex had provided, calling for recommendations, costs, concerns, etc. So, okay, you guys have it.
Thank you. And I think I've been involved with the last discussion here, and I know Steve's been involved with a few. So I'm just going to hand it off to Steve because I think most of them are the building code items.
I hardly know where to start here. I am in support of some of the changes that we're suggesting we should make. As part of that, though, everybody talks about affordable housing. We should understand what we're doing when we put these in. There's a cost associated with these things. I'm a true proponent of supporting all tier 1 going into to our code. But by doing that, we're adding about $30,000 to the cost of a new house. Beyond that, and I think we should do that. It's quite expensive, but I think we should do that. Beyond that, I'm not a big supporter of us getting far outside of what the state code is. I know a lot of cities do, and Jerry and I have talked about this pretty extensively, and we're still on good terms, but we just have a little difference of opinion here as to what a small city like this should be doing. You know, I understand the city of LA doing reach codes because, quite frankly, they have billions of dollars we don't have. But there's a serious cost associated with this. I know Jerry's suggesting we rewrite some of the code sections, and I don't really have a strong opinion on that. But if we start rewriting the municipal code sections and moving things around, then we get into the idea of we're going to have to hire somebody to go through that entire code and make sure the sections we're changing still fit with all of the other sections that are in the code. And that would be outside of my realm. That's not me that would do that. As far as adopting the code, the tier 1 codes and things like that, that is in my realm. Fairly easy to do if we stay the way we are, but if we start changing things, then it involves other people. And quite frankly, I think that's kind of the extent of my input into what we do with codes.
And Steve, I just want to make one clarification, which you couldn't tell by reading the document, because I tried to be as honest about writing the document as possible. You weren't in that meeting, because in that meeting, the recommendation was simply to adopt tier 1, restructure our municipal code and take anything that has to do with energy, put it into a section, anything with green building, put it into a section so people could find it. And that doesn't happen overnight, but that could happen as a result of creating those sections. And then as we change other things, move those. There were other recommendations in there that Steve Pierce would like to have addressed, which was, we have a section in there about what to do with solar panels, which we don't think is enforceable. And I actually did a little paper to explain to people what 2022 will handle as far as solar panels and where it is different than what we've done. And it's fairly practical as far as what the state's done. And it is not unreasonable for cost. And we can't override that anyway. But the one part which says all electric, the part that you missed was, I was trying to be honest about this. My recommendation, that's where Steve Pierce and I differ. I thought that staying with tier 1 for all intents and purposes for us was a very good statement and was doing the right thing and taking us there. We didn't need all electric because of the way 2022 is stated, that for all intents and purposes, anybody who decides to put gas in has to have an awful lot of money. So they made it in 2022 that it's more expensive to install gas than it is to put in electric.
Well, I believe we haven't actually seen the codes for 2022 yet.
Yeah, I know.
But from what I'm told is in there, if you put gas, if a jurisdiction allows you to put gas, you also are required to put electric in there for all of those appliances. Mm-hmm. So if that's truly in there, to at some point do away with gas would be pretty easily. And I know you and I have talked about this. When gas still makes up 50% of the electricity that's generated in the state, I see a huge conflict there with what are we really accomplishing? And that's just a personal opinion, not from my city view. But
I'll come to your office and explain it to you, why it makes sense. And I guess at this point, Carrie, you have anything else to say, or?
Yeah, so I think the tier 1, and I've gone through the tier 1 with my own projects, and I am LEED certified, and I do believe that, even though it adds to the upfront cost of the building, that is saved throughout the life of the building on electricity. I mean, my big thing is insulation and proper orientation, and insulation, not just in the walls, but in the windows, in the building envelope, with the solar reflectance, all that kind of stuff. It's extremely cheap compared to the energy costs throughout the life of the building, which is the point of the green building codes. And so I'm very supportive of that. I do think, yes, it'd be, if we had all the money in the world to do things with, yeah, it'd be great to have all the green building stuff and energy stuff all in one place. I think it's the cost of doing that as one kind of project is probably cost prohibitive to the city. I don't think that means that we can't, work away at things as we change things over time. But there does, and maybe there's a way to, that you can search the building code for a specific term or something like that. Unfortunately, the way ordinances get passed, there's like 2,000 ordinances in the city almost, and we're up to 1783 or something like that. They all get combined and then updated based on the wording in that. And it's a great ideal, and I think working and having that in mind is helpful. But I do, yeah, in terms of an additional project, and it would be sort of, if it's a green building code, it would be in the building department. And so I think that's where I would need to look at Steve to take that, or for the building department to take that on. And they know their capacity much better than I do. And so I kind of want to stay out of that piece of it. I do know that when planning department does, when we put together our checklists, we can certainly think about making sure that people know those things up front, like the EV requirements and things like that. The other note that I would just say anecdotally on the green building code, or the REACH code components, I'm not sure about the habitat, but I do know the Woodmark, the potential City Ventures project, and the Huntley Square projects are all electric only.
Yeah.
So I think we're starting to see that in new construction already. So.
Yeah, that was part of the argument that I made with Steve Pierce as to the impact would be minimal for us in various places. I'll make a couple of comments and I'll open for questions because I want to address some of the things that the two of you just said. First is Zeno, fighting always makes me read books, and he handed me another book. And in this book, it says the average cost to go net zero in a home is $70,000. And that's a retrofit. I don't know about building, whether the difference is there. I know from the building that I'm doing currently that my cost to go beyond tier 1. I think, Steve, I'm beyond tier 1.
Yeah, yes, you are.
Okay. And when you're building the building, it's actually fairly trivial. And the cost of materials is not excessive. It might have been $5,000 worth of material and then the labor to assemble it. It would be good, from my point of view, if the two of you were to take the form that we're trying, because the process for me is important too. I think Alex has opened something up that be really beneficial for the city as far as we do things. Take the form and put those comments that you have in there so that we can use that, and it goes to the city council. And when it leaves the Climate Action Committee, we know what your point of view is, even if our point of view might be different. So we might take what you said and you say, it does say in there, I don't know how much more it's going to cost for us to do this. But you can say, I have to do it every 3 years as a result of doing this. The part about the sections in Title 15 or Part 15, I guess it's the title. It's a part, isn't it? I never know. Yeah, it's Title 15 of our code versus Title 17 of our code. I know we have both green building code and energy items that show up in other people's codes. The idea of having the separate code, separate sections, is not Jerry dreamed it up. I got the idea by looking at multiple cities' codes, and they all have it. So that's one of the conversions they're doing. It doesn't have to happen overnight, Carrie, as you said. It'll be progressive. The fact that we would establish those segments, and over time, we'd look at things saying, that belongs over here, or city council comes along and says, we want to do blah, blah, blah. And Carrie and Steve, you're going to walk in there and say, well, that belongs in Title 1540 or Title 1541. And that's where we would structure it. And that's what I foresaw as being the way it would be handled. Other cities with a larger staff, by the way, did en masse make the changes. The last part, I think you do need to address, Steve Pierce has asked the question of me, and it's in the document, that we should remove, because it's not enforceable, our solar code, and simply adopt what the state is doing.
I think the state is going to match in 2022 what our code says anyway now, right?
No, actually, I thought the same thing, Steve. And so I actually took the time and tried to read the 2022. You know how those are. You read them better than I do. And I did the math for my house. And for my house, the answer would come back without the ADU, because we don't require for the ADU. I need 4 kilowatt hours, 4 kilowatts on my home. The California code comes back with, because of the things that I've done, more like 2.7, because the California code evaluates the enclosure, evaluates if you have storage, evaluates what appliances you have, and all of that. And so it's a very sophisticated calculation. I got part of that also from Title 24 expert, who the guy who did my calculations.
Right.
And back and explained it to me.
Well, one of the things I will tell you, we are definitely going to do, and we've been pushing this for the last couple months, is all of when we buy our new codes for 2022, we will buy the online version. And so right on the front of our webpage, those codes will be up for everybody to just click on and kind of search and see what's there. So it will be available.
Yeah, they're going to need your expertise, though, to understand what they just read. I have to tell you.
A lot of that is true, and but at least they will be available. So, and we're trying to get some clarification with our handouts and our things on our webpage, so it makes it easier. We do not, you guys know, we do not have a lot of staff to do this kind of stuff. And,
well, I'd like to see you document that in the document. Let me field some questions, and Kenna has the first one because her hand is up.
Yes, Jerry, thank you. I was hoping to encourage you to ask for questions, but I just want to clarify in my own understanding and for the group, there's two separate threads of discussion here. And as far as I understand it, one is we're talking about changes to the code itself, and another is reorganizing the way the code is written. And
well, that's one and the same. Well, from my point of view, it's one and the same. Yeah.
I understand from your point of view, but I do think that there are some differences, and it's a very technical discussion.
Yep.
So I would love it if you could just, in kind of simple layman's terminology, say what is it like that we are trying to change in terms of what people building homes in Sebastopol would be doing different.
Okay. Let me try to answer it. I know Steve can jump in too, but if you look at the document that I scribbled together, it actually lists them. One is we adopt Cal Green. Now, it turns out the Cal Green is mandatory. So if you don't do anything, you can take the mandatory, as we've gone through in the other education sessions, and you have to do that, and you don't mention it in your city code. In 2019, we removed mention of Cal Green in our city code, which was the last time the Cal Green was published, because the first line of Cal Green says, if you don't put this in your city code, you have to follow it anyway. So we removed it. Our practice is to do Cal Green and Tier 1. If you're using Tier 1, you have to put in your city code that you've adopted Cal Green and Tier 1. And so that has to go back into our municipal code. Now, where would you put it in our municipal code? Likely someplace in Title 15. Okay, where in Title 15, there's no place for it to go per se. So it would become its own section, right? And that's where the other part happens. The other part that goes along with that is there's a number of things that we have in our code that are not enforceable because we never did the paperwork to make them enforceable. The solar mandate that we have is not enforceable. You can't put that in your code unless you file with the CEC, because that's a reach code.
Right.
Is that clear?
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. If you don't clear it with the California Building Commission for the changes like that, they're not enforceable.
Yeah. Steve Pierce, did I miss anything on our list?
No, there's still kind of the discussion of the all electric, but I think Steve Brown has talked about that. You know, I have a little more to add. I can do that later or now.
Okay. Let's see if another hand shows up. Anybody else? Everett, good to see you, by the way.
Thank you. You too. I'm supportive of the, of course, new buildings and how it all kind of fits in. But going back to some of the initial comments of the meeting of equity and so forth, when the last fires and that we had, that everybody lost power. Now everybody can afford a generator. It was gas that kept people going. for cooking and for hot water and so forth. So, you know, it's my concern is more with the conversion and kind of where that leaves everyone. And I know that, you know, overall electrical is the way to go, but just to keep that in mind, and because just saying, hey, we're going to convert, and you know, there's some people that can't. There's some people that would have been a lot worse off had they not, for 2 or 3 days had that availability.
Okay, a clarification then. A clarification is what we're discussing is for new buildings and major remodels. And it's not, there's a whole question about retrofits, and that's one of the other things we want to bring up someday.
Yeah.
Included in Cal Green and for any filing, you actually have to prove that it is not cost prohibitive. And in fact, it's cost neutral. Long run. And so that's actually part of the criteria. That's why some of these things take a while to show up in the state code, because they have to go through the same thing. They can't make it burdensome.
Yeah. No, and I understand the discussion is about new buildings, but I just wanted to throw out there because there were comments about retrofitting, and there may be in the future, but you know, kind of keep that in mind as just yet another straw on the camel's back.
Yeah.
You know, for equity. So thank you.
And one of the concerns for me that brings up is, what are we going to do in these PSP events? Are people now going to go out and put a propane tank on their site and keep propane on site to run a generator so they have power? What do people do that have to have power all the time now do? It's either going to have to be a gas or a propane generator. And how much of that's going to go on unpermitted, because quite frankly, that might be what I would do, is have one of those generators of some sort to keep my place going. So,
but you know, one of the things that, sorry, I'm making an argument on that. I mean, probably not the right place right here, but the whole point is this: how much can you actually operate only with natural gas and without electricity? It doesn't heat your house. I mean, you can get hot water,
but it would drive your generator.
Okay, very good. Joshua.
Yeah, just a couple of minor points. I'm wondering, one, if we're trying to get this to an action place today, I'm not sure if, I mean, we have sort of been discussing these subjects.
That was the goal the last time, was get to an action place, and the point was made, can we restructure how it's submitted, and can we give staff a chance to make comments on this before we have an action? We don't have to have an action today.
Okay. Yeah. In that sense, I mean, I'm personally, as a committee member, I'm in support of moving this along. I think in terms of the document and how it's written, there's a little bit of just wordsmithing and editing that needs to happen. There's some confusion, at least on my part, as to part versus chapter versus title with respect to these numbers that are in there. And then just a little bit, you know, sentences like this is neither noted in the Sebastopol Code, you know, so just like.
I just want to say, the reason I'm laughing is that I asked Carrie one time, is 15 a chapter, a title, or a part? And 17 that she owns. We don't know. You have to look this stuff up. And this is the magic of California.
Just for the sake of, you know, clarity and consistency, I feel like that.
Yeah, but that was why I think you might have missed the presentation. In the presentation, I said Title 15, which for us is our building code. Title 17, which for us is our zoning code.
I'm just looking at your first page here, and the numbers, you know, 15 is referenced as a title, as a part, as a chapter. So
is it in all three? I thought I went back and I fixed it.
All the same. So you know, that needs to be more clear in the document.
I'm going to ask you guys to stop talking about the technicalities of the document at this point. Right? We have Steve in the room. We've been asking for staff comment. We have staff here to give us comment. And we can work on the wording and work on the action item. And
that's fine. That's fine. That's fine, Ken. I was going to say it can come back again.
It's important to get our public comment and to move on so that the public that have come can comment on the framework draft.
And Joshua, you have more to say? And then I saw Sarah had her hand up.
With respect to you guys, neither one has let me finish what I was trying to say, which is that with respect to these edits and with respect to the staff input, I don't think we're ready to make this an action item today. I think we're almost there, but I don't think we're in a place to vote on this. So perhaps we can figure out how to package it up.
And nobody's been a motion on the floor yet either, so. Sarah, you had your hand up. Okay. Anybody else? Steve, please.
So I want to bring up the all electric nature of the discussion. I understand that we don't have the resources in terms of money or staff time or even the inclination to look at the all electric reach codes. And my concern is that in the next go round of the regulations, I guess that would be another 3 years down the road, they're still not going to go all electric because there will be pushback from multiple areas as there is now down in Southern California. Some big cities have done it, LA, San Francisco. That may drive the code, but it may not. Meanwhile, we'll have built 12 houses a year. Some will be electric and some won't. People really love having their gas stove, and other cities have found that when you install the electric supply as if electric appliances will be installed, they still opt for gas. And I think we'll find that with the current code cycle. So I want to be in a place where a few years down the road, if we don't adopt all electric now, we're going to be moving on it at that point if the state decides they're not going to do it in their next go around. That means the city needs to be ready in terms of budget for the building department to do the research work and to write it. But that's a hard thing to draft at this point because that's years down the road. But I don't want to be in a position where we miss some budget cycle and we're not all on the same page or the understanding that, okay, we're not doing it now, but we will be doing it later if the state doesn't come through. Thank you.
Carrie.
Just to address that question. So Steve, I believe like the tier one, that I'm assuming that's something that's already in your budget to deal with this year. The tier one and NECEC to make sure that our codes are enforceable.
Yes, we can
Yeah.
adopt that right along with the 22 codes. The codes will be out in July. We have to adopt them by January 1st of next year. So we're going to do that this fall no matter what. So what we adopt as part of those, it's all the same.
Steve, do you have other exceptions to Title 24 to Green Building Code that you file for?
There are a couple in our code now. They obviously are unenforceable. And my intention would be to bring none forward, just to adopt the state codes.
Okay. Carrie?
And I do just want to advise the unenforceable versus enforceable. That certainly smaller permits that don't require a design review or a use permit, those are unenforceable, but the city just adopted standard conditions of approval, which, Steve, did you include the tier one? So we included tier one construction in that. So any project that goes through a discretionary project like design review, well, our design guidelines talk about sustainable building, and that is one of the thresholds that we apply to projects. So for any project that has to go through, so the larger projects like Huntley Square, they're already doing it, but they have to meet all of tier one.
But an infill house project would not fall under those terms, more than likely. So we couldn't do that there. I still try, but if they push back, we have to kind of back down a little bit. But.
I'm going to just note the time and that we've gotten to the end of the allotted time for this discussion, but I also want to acknowledge that Steve is in the room with us and ask if there's any committee members that have not had a chance to ask a question that Steve might be able to answer that you ask those questions now. And Carrie, is your hand still up? I don't see any committee members. Are there any members of the public who would like to address this issue of the reach code options, and specifically anyone that has a question for Steve Brown, so that we can let him leave the meeting in a timely manner? I do not see any.
Just a point of order. I'd
Yes.
like to do something. I want to see if you're amenable to it. I'd like to move that we send this recommendation to the city council. I'd like somebody to second it. I'd like somebody to say, I'd like to move the vote on this to so many weeks from now and give staff time to fill out the parts that with the comments that they have made today, and for Joshua to send me those things that I screwed up and for you to make corrections. And we can submit that as the corrected version for a vote in either 2 weeks or whenever the next meeting is, or when after that. I may not make the next meeting, but at the very least, you've had the discussion and you've had all the input that I have to give.
Thank you. I still believe I would like to move this as an action item to our next agenda so that people with having gotten input from Carrie and Steve today can sit with the document a little bit longer. And I would very much encourage us to take action on it at our next meeting. If Joshua, if that seems appropriate to you, great. So thank you for explaining that, Jerry, and I'm declining. Anyway, we will move on.
That happens.
Steve Brown, is there anything else that you feel like we should have asked you that we haven't asked you about this?
I don't think so. And quite frankly, if you want me back at any future meetings, if you let Terry know, I will be here. It's not a big deal. So nope, I think we're good.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. We are going to move on to our regular agenda item B, the Climate Action Framework draft discussion. And I'm going to hand this over to Phoebe.
All right, thank you, Kenna, and good afternoon, everyone. So today you should have all received in the agenda packet the public review draft of the Climate Action Framework. And what I'm going to go over today is just a brief overview of the document, because I think everyone has had a chance to review it, but want to just point out some sort of the key points and some things that you might not have seen if you didn't review the second draft that was sent out after the last committee meeting. So is everyone able to see my slides only? Great. Okay, so I'm just going to give a little bit of background as well for some community members that might be here and not be as familiar with the project. This Climate Action Framework is coming out of the December 2019 Climate Emergency Resolution that was passed by the city, and that led to the creation of this committee, the Climate Action Committee. And so the framework is sort of the next step, working towards the goal that was set in the emergency resolution of carbon neutrality by 2030. And the goal of the framework is to sort of figure out what the next steps are to reach that goal. This is what the development process looked like for the framework. We had a community engagement strategy starting late fall of last year. There was a lot of outreach and presentations done in the first couple of months of 2022. And then the draft is now complete up on the city website. I will put the link to it in the chat right now, so you can all pull it up if you don't have it up already. And then the draft is anticipated to go to City Council in July. So there's 4 sort of main sections in the body of the framework. There's the introduction, background, action areas, and moving forward. And then there's also 4 appendices, but I'll focus on Appendix A, which is the most relevant one. In the introduction section, that's the sort of explaining what the framework is. And as I mentioned, it's building off of the goals of the Climate Emergency Resolution, which were to reduce citywide greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2030, sequester carbon using nature-based solutions, prepare for climate impacts that can't be avoided, and then to center equity and community engagement in all of that. And also in the introduction, there's this how to use the framework section that's new from the first draft of the framework. It's got suggestions for community members. So there's these take action boxes throughout the framework that have ways that community members can reduce their impact or prepare for climate change. The framework is also sort of a reference for actions the city has already taken. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can check that out in the background section and also in each action area in the past action section. There's some suggestions for how city staff should use the document to make sure that these climate considerations are incorporated into all city operations. And then for city council and boards and committees, also some recommendations there. And for the Climate Action Committee, that process is laid out a little bit more in the final moving forward section. And there's these 6 sections in the background section that provide the context for the project. And I will just focus a little bit on the greenhouse gas inventory, and seeing here that transportation is about 2/3 of Sebastopol's greenhouse gas emissions, building emissions are about 1/4. And wanted to note here, I've heard a couple of times there's a misconception about how transportation emissions are calculated. So this inventory does not include pass-through traffic through Sebastopol. Sebastopol is not responsible for those emissions. It's only responsible for the transportation emissions for trips that either start or end in Sebastopol. And the most recent greenhouse gas data that we have is from 2018, but there is a 2020 inventory that's anticipated to be completed this fall by the RCPA. And this is the inventory that the RCPA completes is an activity-based inventory. So it's looking at the primary sources of emissions that occur within Sebastopol's jurisdictional boundaries. And those are the ones that are most easily reduced through government policy. The framework also has this snapshot of what's called consumption-based emissions. And this is, in a sense, asking the question, what emissions are Sebastopol residents responsible for, instead of what emissions occur within city limits. So this captures a broader picture of emission-causing activities that are sort of the city residents are responsible for. And these consumption-based emissions are hard to measure. So this is data from 2015 that was collected by a UC Berkeley group. So it's hard to measure, and it's also hard to reduce. So this is provided more as some additional context for climate action work in Sebastopol and something to consider and discuss. So then in the 3rd section is the action areas. There's 6 action areas, and each of them includes mitigation considerations, which is reducing actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as adaptation, preparing for climate impacts. Within each action area, there's goals for the future. Those were developed based off of the community input that I received in the initial part of the project. There's a sort of description of the current status of that area in Sebastopol, a review of the city's past actions, opportunities for community action, and then metrics to measure progress towards those goals that are set. And this is an example of the resident action and the measuring project progress section that has those metrics. And one of the next steps in this process would be identifying who is going to measure those metrics and how. And the last section, moving forward, that outlines the role of the committee more specifically. So it has the recommendation to set sort of achievable implementation goals every 6 months or twice a year. And that would sort of describe which policies or which actions the committee wants to evaluate within that time period and either recommend them forward to City Council or not. The moving forward section also describes how progress would be evaluated and recognizes the need for continued collaboration, especially for issues that are outside of the jurisdiction of Sebastopol. So Appendix A is the evolving list of actions that the city might consider to advance those climate goals. It's not a commitment to any specific actions. It's just a resource and a reference, particularly for this committee. And my recommendations that are included at the beginning of that appendix are that the city or the committee should focus on actions that allow the city to lead by example. So that includes incorporating those climate considerations into other aspects of city decision-making, as well as continuing to make city operations and buildings more sustainable and carbon neutral. Also implementing actions that have regional support, so projects where the RCPA or the SCTA have resources, for example, or that they're available to provide assistance for. And then third, focusing on actions that expand community education and engagement efforts. So letting residents know about programs that already exist, and then also prioritizing that community engagement in evaluating future actions. And these are opportunities that I see to really maximize the use of the city's resources, because it is a small city and with limited staff time and budget. And there's a couple upcoming opportunities that I wanted to highlight that sort of illustrate these recommendations. One is the housing element update that is nearing completion, I believe. And that's an opportunity for the Climate Action Committee to weigh in and see how it aligns with climate action framework goals. So the housing element update will include an identification of suitable sites for future construction and wanting to consider how that plays into sustainable land use section of the framework and locating housing near jobs and schools and other places that people need to go every day as much as possible, as well as thinking about how those new homes will be resilient in the face of climate change. Another upcoming opportunity is related to existing building electrification. That's anticipated to be a focus of the RCPA in the fall of this year. So there's some opportunity to collaborate and get some regional support on that project, what this committee has talked about, sort of in a partner to the REACH code discussion, looking at existing building electrification. And then in the community engagement, the third recommendation, there's going to be a bicycle and pedestrian master plan update beginning, anticipated to begin early next year. That's going to be a countywide process, but the city of Sebastopol's plan will be updated as part of that. And that's a space to really incorporate community priorities, since active transportation was a really big priority I heard from the community. So what's next for the framework? The draft was released last Thursday. It's been in the city newsletter. It's been on city Facebook. The press release went out yesterday, and the public comment period will go until July 7th. And then there'll be a final draft presentation to City Council in August. And then it'll be up to this committee to evaluate and prioritize those specific actions, whether they're from the appendix or from somewhere else, and to get additional community input on those actions and move them forward for implementation. And I have about 2 months of the service year left, so I'm hoping to be able to help with some of that prioritization in that remaining timeframe. So I wanted to highlight a couple items that I was hoping to have some group discussion on, and we don't have a lot of time left. But these are some elements that are sort of outstanding in the framework in terms of, the committee discussing them. In the transportation goals, at least one committee member commented on this draft that they did not agree with this goal of prioritizing active and public transportation modes over electric vehicles. The reason that this was phrased this way in the framework was that the goals were developed directly from the community input that I received, and there was a large priority for improved bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and more active transportation in that community input. So that's I think a good thing to discuss with the whole committee, because as far as I know, in the time that I've been here with the committee, it hasn't been a policy discussion. So wanted to bring that up for the whole committee to discuss. There's also sort of an open-ended question about topics outside of Sebastopol's jurisdiction. Those are not really addressed in the framework. So pass-through traffic, which again is not included in the city's greenhouse gas inventory emissions, but it definitely has an impact on the town in terms of traffic and air quality and noise. Consumption emissions, as I mentioned, those are also sort of outside of Sebastopol's direct control, but there's been an interest expressed in thinking about ways that the city can influence that from the committee members. So those are some other topics to think about, and think about what the role of the city and the Climate Action Committee is in addressing them. And then finally, in my prioritization of actions, my recommendations about what actions I think might be most worthwhile for the city, that's open for discussion as well, whether you agree with those recommendations or if you think there's some other considerations that are maybe more important in how to prioritize those. And then if there's any other items that you all feel about the framework that should be discussed with the whole committee, yeah, Kenna, do you want to have a open discussion for this now, or?
Yes, I think we have several more minutes for feedback from the committee on this last public draft.
Okay, great. I think Josh O had stand up first.
Yeah, thanks, Phoebe. The draft is looking great in general. I really appreciate the format changes and updates you made since the last round. I'm mostly just wondering what's the best way for us to send feedback to you over the next couple of weeks. How would you prefer us to make specific comments on the draft?
Yeah, if you have specific comments on a specific section of the draft, it's helpful for me to have those comments directly on the document. And I can send you an updated Word version if you need one, or I believe you're able to, depending on the software you have, you might be able to comment directly on the PDF. Otherwise, email comment is fine. And for the community members are here, this is the Climate Action Committee email address, and you can send comments to that address. Jerry.
A few things. First of all, terrific pivot. This is a great improvement over the first version of the document that I saw. This is amazing. I really like it. Second is, I've been driving EVs since 1998, and it was not me who said we should prioritize EVs over active transportation. My role in MTC, I keep saying active transportation is what we should be doing. It was me that asked about through traffic. And as a service center, probably someplace in the framework, we want to mention we're a service center and that we have a responsibility as such to consider those impacts as well. The through traffic, by the way, is a result of my work on the CAP on Sunnyvale. In those days, absolutely, the inventory included Highway 101 traffic through and 280 and 85 for Sunnyvale. Not much you can do about it other than try to get people to move into your town and work in your town, but that's about it. The one comment I would make about the document itself as far as structure, I would put numbers for the sections. You notice in the write-up that I did on the REACH code, I used sections of our general plan for statement. And I think if there's numbers in the framework, then staff can use those numbers when they're reporting to council or whoever, saying this supports blah, blah, blah goal, number such and such, that's within the framework. And I think that's useful. It's just a mechanical thing. But terrific pivot, great document. Don't make a lot of changes.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, I agree with your comment about numbering. I just didn't have time to get to it before this public draft, so I'll work on it for the next one. Lisa.
Yeah, I think it's very excellent. It's I love the photos you used. The way it all looks is just a pleasant thing to look at and to go through for sure. I did write to Phoebe about the my concern about EVs. I don't know if we ever really, as a committee, thought it's not the active transportation that I'm having a question about. It's more the public transportation. I think that my sense is that we are a small, very spread out, largely rural town. And I think that public transportation is, it's going to be somewhat limited here, is my view. I think there's, for a lot of people who live outside of town and come into town, it's going to be pretty difficult because they live in rural areas. So the very first item on Appendix A is prioritize active and public modes of transportation. And I think that we should talk about that. And really, this is going to be Sebastopol's guiding document. And to me, I'd like to see EVs and active transportation prioritized. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Kenna?
I would love to hear from the people on the Transportation Working Group about this prioritization. I do share Lisa's concerns that active transport and electrification and accessible charging would be the priorities I would pick out of the air. But I feel like there is a Transportation Working Group that has done more research than I have.
Would anyone from the Transportation Working Group like to? Oh, I don't know that we have anyone from the Transportation Working Group. Oh, there's Zeno.
Yeah, so I'm kind of a community member of the working group, not a committee member. I have my personal opinion about this, and I think it's worthwhile to revisit the issue. Maybe public transportation, as I see it, is more like shared mobility. And so we could broaden the approach a bit. I think part of the problem with vehicles is often that single-use vehicles creates a lot of parking need in town. I do see maybe what we conceive as public transportation, these big buses going around rural areas. It's implausible, but I think there's more things moving in the transportation area, and maybe the word shared mobility could be used in a framework like this. Thanks.
Thank you, Zeno. Argus?
I was just going to chime in with Kenna and Lisa, and I just say I'd like to agree with them, based on anecdotal evidence that, I can see. I feel that really prioritizing public transportation from my point of view, unless there's data that points otherwise, doesn't seem like the best, item to put first in, our climate action plan. We're such a spread out town, and especially, I understand that like the town is denser like downtown, but a lot of people live in unincorporated Sebastopol, including me, and it would just be very inefficient to invest lots of resources, I feel, into public transportation when it's just such a spread out town and not many people are using the public transport system already available. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. Joshua?
Yeah, just to comment that it's my impression that this discussion topic, specifically around transportation issues, relates to a little bit of a quandary in the scope of the framework. I feel that Phoebe has sort of understandably focused on things that are essentially relative to Sebastopol city limits, and in that's the area that the council and the government and the committees have jurisdiction over. And as we're all observing, there's lots of people who are essentially Sebastopol residents but don't live in city limits. And there's an area that Phoebe highlighted and mentions towards the end of the framework, saying there are all these related issues to Sebastopol's context that need to continue to be considered and developed. However, our sphere of influence is higher within the city limits than it is within the 95472 area zip code, for instance. And so for me, like, yeah, I live in a Sebastopol address, but it's outside of town. So I suggest that quandary is something that we're not necessarily going to resolve right away, and that the city committees and government are sort of obligated to focus first on the core while maintaining active consideration of their active relationship to the context. But you can't really tell the people outside of town what to do. You can just maybe improve some programming on their behalf.
Thank you, Joshua. So would committee members feel more comfortable with this goal if I removed the public part of it and it just said to prioritize active modes of transportation? I'll go to Debbie. She had her hand up.
Yeah, I just commenting on the inside outside city limits, because it is very impactful to our town, the people who are out of city limits. Is there any way, Phoebe, that do they have a climate action framework in the county that we can work with them, since they govern everybody with a Sebastopol address outside of city limits, but yet it impacts us? Or is that just an impossibility? And thank you so much. It's very different document than we first saw it, and I just greatly appreciate you.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, Tanya may have a better perspective on this than I do. I do not believe there's a climate action plan adopted by the county, but climate considerations is one pillar of the strategic plan. Is that correct, Tanya?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so there's definitely an opportunity for dialogue there, and I think that's sort of what I am trying to get at in the final paragraph of the framework, that these are some bigger issues that the city alone can't address, but by working with other jurisdictions and continuing to participate in the RCPA, that's where those sort of more county-wide issues can be addressed. Jerry?
I was just turning around to answer your question, and I answered in chat as well. I don't like to use negatives in a document, but this might be the place to do it. Essentially, what Zeno was saying, and he'll correct me, I'm sure, is that the single-use powered vehicle was the thing we'd like to get away from. And regardless of whether it's electric or not, the first electric car I got, I was so proud. I was telling everybody, and my wife turned to me and said, "You're kidding? You're still driving a car. You know, why are you driving a car to work every day?" And I think that's Zeno's point as well. So maybe the negative is there, and the single passenger powered vehicle or whatever. Somebody with better handle probably can cover that one. To Debbie's comment, since she was there just before, one of the things when we did the climate action plan for Sunnyvale, and that's a fairly packed area, we don't have county in between the cities, but we were very careful inside of our climate action plan to say, hey, if we zone something a certain, we haven't talked about zoning, we zone something a certain way, we need to make sure that it's compatible with what the adjoining city is doing, and we need to work on our plans together. Because if you just do it in one place and don't do it someplace else, it's not effective. And maybe just a statement like that, and I think you pretty much have that covered. If somebody thinks you need something a little more powerful and more explicit about outside of the borders of the city, fine. And nobody in my family actually knows where the borders of the city are. I have to pull out the zoning maps that I have.
All right, Kenna?
I just want to acknowledge we are 6 minutes from the end of this meeting, and there may be members of the public who would like to comment on the Climate Action Framework draft. So I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for them to come forward. It looks like Steve Pierce's hand is up, but I encourage anyone who has attended this meeting from the public to comment on the Climate Action Framework draft. Please go ahead and raise your hand. Let us know that you're wanting to speak. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I also want to repeat what people were saying. Great job, Phoebe. It's a vast improvement over the earlier document. There are a couple of areas that I want to talk about. First, in your recommendations, I think you had the first thing was the city leading by example. Well, we've had the city leading by example for, I don't know, 20 odd years. And what we really need is people stepping up and businesses stepping up, and we need to help them do that. So I guess I'm less concerned about the city leading by example than making progress on our greenhouse gas reduction goals. And to that end, I think we need something in the introductory that says, yeah, we've made progress, but we are so far behind compared to where we want to be in 2030. And we need to kind of light a fire under all of us to make that happen. And I want some statements in there that we are very far behind to meet our goals. And we need some radical action to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Phoebe, was there anything else that you wanted to say before we close this topic?
No, I don't think so. Just to, reiterate the next steps on this, that it'll be open for public comment until July 7th, and then I will be updating you all on when it is scheduled to go to City Council. Thank you.
And I think I'm speaking for many people when I say I wish we had another 30 minutes of meeting time to all just tell you what a great job you've done and how grateful we are for the work that you've done. And I encourage all the committee members and everyone else attending this meeting to please send your comments. Let's make this the best document we can make it. And the more we say, the better we'll do. Go ahead, Lisa.
So I'm just wondering how the process is going to work going forward. Because theoretically, this is a document that's coming from our committee, not just from Phoebe. So are we going to vote on passing it? And I'm trying to figure out how we're going to make decisions about various things that we may not all agree on.
Carrie?
And actually Councilmember Gurney may be able to kind of help, since she sits on a similar committee where they don't necessarily, or council where you don't necessarily have unanimous about every detail of the document and talk about the negotiations that happen there. But so I'll just speak to the motion itself would be to recommend that City Council adopt the Climate Action Framework. And this will also be going to the Planning Commission. We'll have them do the same thing as well. So.
Jerry?
Two things. I think it's appropriate, not for the framework to go to the City Council, but for the framework to come from the Climate Action Committee to the City Council. Because of that, I'm moving that we send a recommendation to the City Council that they adopt the Climate Action Framework.
Do I hear a second to that motion? Joshua, are you seconding the motion? All right, are there, so it is 4:59, which does not leave us time to discuss this motion. I believe we have time to consider a motion at a future meeting before we would need to send this to city council. So I think we will, I'm sorry for taking your motion, asking for a second, and then noticing that we really don't have time to.
You know, this is the only committee that I belong to that actually always ends at the end, regardless of whether it's done. And on the MTC, we end 2 hours late. Planning Commission always did too.
So that's a choice we've made, and as a chair group of as retaining our committee members, and maybe that's not the most efficient way to get things done, but that's how we're rolling this show right now. So, Carrie, did you want to say something?
So kind of, I'll just help out with I don't know if it's Robert rules or whatever it is, but you would then entertain a motion to continue the item and I would continue it to your next meeting. And I'm doing a horrible job on dates today, mixing up June and July, but it looks like your next meeting is July 13th.
So would anyone like to make a motion that we continue this item to the July 13th meeting? Joshua, I hear your motion. Would anyone like to second that continuation motion? Everett seconds that. All in favor of that motion, please raise your hand.
And keep them there while I count. 1, 2. All right, hold on. The Brady Bunch is moving all around their screen. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 8, so we do have the votes are there to continue the item. Motion passes.
Do I need to ask for no's, or do we just move on?
You know what? I don't even know about rules for orders, since normally for we're taking roll votes. We would need that because we would need to know who abstains. So yes, you may want to do that just to.
I'll nod in favor of continuation. Please raise your hand. And Alex, your hand is raised. Okay. Anyone opposing this motion for the continuation?
All right, so it is 8-1 and the motion still carries.
Thank you. So we will continue that to our next meeting. In the meantime, we are skipping all the rest of our things. A very brief chair report that Carrie has agreed to work on the work plan and have Phoebe help her with that. And if you have input on the next agenda, please email Joshua and myself. And the action items that I believe is Joshua and Jerry are going to collaborate on wordsmithing an actionable document for the REACH codes.
And also collect the comments from staff.
And collect the comments from staff, yes.
Can I've been stacking
and
up
Jerry,
yeah, go ahead, Joshua.
Yeah, I've been stacking up action items since I'm back. I'm trying to.
Oh yeah, go for it.
So yeah, things for potential committee input and homework before next time, when there was that recommendation to do a little research and check out the Woodmark Apartments project, and consider advocacy on that front. The REACH codes subject, we are trying to move to a motion or an adoptable motion for next time. So please send any feedback or editorial suggestions on that to Jerry for an update of that draft, so we can get that one passed on the next meeting, hopefully. Phoebe is looking for feedback on the draft essentially over the next 2 weeks until July 7th. So do try to do that. Also, since the subject of the Climate Action Committee duties, the list of duties got tabled for next time, folks should make a point of reviewing that document as well, so that we can hopefully start a little faster and not be picking up the background on the next time so much. Thanks.
All right, Everett, go ahead.
Just want to encourage everyone, if you don't have any plans, to walk down to the Peacetown Festival at the Barlow and get some recreation and mingle with our fellow community members.
Thank you. And Carrie,
From 4:30 to 7:30, sorry.
Carrie, was there something you needed the group to hear?
Yes, so Jerry had brought up actually some questions about construction waste management and also other pickup and recycling periods. Tony, our engineering manager, I did bring this up at our department head meeting. She's going to be scheduling a meeting with Recology. And so I don't know if there's anyone from this group that wants to join me as a representative from the CAC. Obviously, we're scheduling in a couple weeks when Ambrosia is back. She's actually out right now, which is why she's not here today. But if there is someone else who's a non-Recology member of the group who wants to join that, please just send me an email. I think it's an informal meeting just to understand some items. The city will be renegotiating our contract with Recology in next year or the next, I think. And so this is a good time to start having conversations about some of the waste reduction things they could help us with.
All right, thank you, everyone. We will adjourn this meeting until our next meeting on